All right, so Erin's our next speaker. She's talking about the only way to read the Chronicles of Narnia. And can you tell us a little bit about your background in this subject?
Yes, my mom read the Chronicles of Narnia to me when I was little. It was like one of the first books that she read to me once I could understand those kinds of books. And I've read them so many times since, I've lost count. I read them to Leah. I read them to myself many times. I've taken some C.S. Lewis classes and read a lot of books, and yeah, it's my favorite series ever. So today I'm going to talk about the only way to read the Chronicles of Narnia. First, just show of hands, who has read or seen the movie of at least one of the Chronicles of Narnia? Great. Who has read all of them? Awesome. So there is something we need to talk about. It is 2025, and people are out here reading the Chronicles of Narnia in the wrong order. You can just see some of the online rage about this phenomenon here. It is a major problem. So before I talk about the correct order to read the Chronicles in, I just want to go briefly through each of the books for those who haven't read them. So this is the order in which they were published. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe came first. This is the introduction to Narnia. 4 children find their way into a magical land, and they have to defeat the evil witch. One of them betrays his siblings, and then the great lion Aslan has to die so that he can be absolved of his sins. And then Aslan comes back to life and saves Narnia, and the children become kings and queens. And then at the end of the book, they come back into our world. Prince Caspian, The Return to Narnia, was second. The children go back to Narnia because it's been many years and Narnia needs their help again. And they have to go and help this prince regain his kingdom and help the Narnians kind of take back Narnia. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the next one. This is 2 of the children come back to Narnia along with their cousin who hasn't been before. And they go on a voyage to the end of the world. They have lots of adventures. They fight dragons and discover, very mysterious things. The Silver Chair is next. So the children's cousin comes back with his friend to Narnia, and they have to find the missing prince. They go underground, and they have to fight a witch and bring him back up to Narnia so that he can be king. Next is The Horse and His Boy. This story actually takes place during the reign of the children from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it's a jump back in time. But it's about a boy who is a Narnian by birth, but he's sold into slavery. And then he finds this talking horse and they make their way to Narnia and they escape, and he realizes he's actually royalty and he comes home to Narnia. Next is The Magician's Nephew, which tells how Narnia was created. So it goes back in time and is kind of the origin story. And then the last book is The Last Battle, which is all about the end of Narnia. All the children come back, and they get to see the end of Narnia and then go to the afterlife and live happily ever after. So this is the order in which they were published, and this is the order that any sensible person would read them in. However, let's see what the publishers have done. So they put The Magician's Nephew first, then The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then The Horse and His Boy, then Prince Caspian, then The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, then The Silver Chair, and at least they left The Last Battle second. So it's just chaos. So why are there 2 orders? One is published order, the order the books were published in, and then the other is chronological order, which is the order that the plot actually takes place in. So Lewis wrote each book from 1950 to 1956. He just churned them out 1 a year, which is honestly amazing. But if you look over on the other side, you'll see when they take place in our world and in Narnian years. So The Magician's Nephew, the very beginning of Narnia. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, a little bit later. Horse and His Boy, again, takes place at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in chronology. And then Prince Caspian is quite later than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in Narnian years, but only a year later in our time, because time works differently in both worlds. Then The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is shortly after Prince Caspian. The Silver Chair is a little bit later, and then The Last Battle is quite forward in the future. So why do I care so much? We're going to talk about that next. So here, again, is the order that they're published in today. This is the order that basically every publisher prints them in. This is wrong. This is right. And now we're going to talk about why. So the first important point is that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe just has to be first. And there's so many reasons, I wrote them down. Okay. So it's the perfect introduction to Narnia. It's the first book that Lewis wrote, and so he's saying things like, I bet you're wondering why the animals were talking, and what is this weird land that the children have discovered inside this wardrobe? If this is like the 6th book you read about Narnia, you're like, yeah, I get it. I've been here before. You get to experience the surprise and the wonder of Narnia alongside the children. This book is very wondrous, and it's all about like the magic of Narnia, which you're just not going to get if you've already been to Narnia. It's a very captivating storyline. There's a lot of emotion, and it's very exciting. It's more exciting than, in my opinion, than The Magician's Nephew, which gets a little weird. And if you start with that one, you might lose interest. It's also the perfect introduction to Aslan. It kind of tells you exactly who he is, and then all the other books kind of build on his character. It sets the scene, it sets up the characters. The children go through like character growth in this story that just sets the scene for the whole series. Notably Edmund. Edmund betrays his siblings and then has to be redeemed, and that really plays throughout all the rest of the books. Yeah, as I said, the plot lays the groundwork for all the rest of the Chronicles. It kind of sets up the themes and everything. And certain sentences just don't make sense if you don't read it first. Like at the end, it says, the children leave Narnia, and it says that was the end of their adventures, but maybe it was only the beginning. And if it's the 2nd book, you're like, yeah, I know, it's a series. All right, so that's why Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe should be first. Another reason is, I just wanted to share, this guy says, this development of the world in which Narnia exists is crucial for the reader. And this is partly why it's important to read the Narniad, which is what we call the series, in written order or publication order, and not according to its internal chronology. In a very meta way, readers are able to experience with Narnia what Lucy experiences with Aslan. Every time the youngest Pevensey returned to Narnia, it seemed that Aslan had grown bigger. But when she mentions it, Aslan tells her, that is because you are older, little one. Every year you grow, you will find me bigger. In a similar manner, every time a reader returns to Narnia, they have grown older, and likewise, they find the Narnian world bigger and richer. So the themes of Narnia get more complex as the series goes on, and that's kind of something that you have to grow into along with the series. All right, now, Magician's Nephew should not be the first book you read. So this does tell about how Narnia came to be, but the very second sentence says, this is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our own world and the land of Narnia first began. If this is the first book you read, you're going to read that sentence and be like, Narnia? What's that? Why do I care? You know, so if you read it later in the series, you're like, oh, that's how the White Witch came to Narnia. Oh, that's where the lamppost came from. That's why the wardrobe takes them to Narnia. So it has a lot more impact if it's read later in the series because it's more fun to find these things out. Another reason is, if you read them in published order, you get The Magician's Nephew, which is the creation of Narnia, and then immediately after you get The Last Battle, which is the end of Narnia. So they just play very well together, and there's a lot of things in The Magician's Nephew that come back into play in The Last Battle. Another reason is The Horse and His Boy works better when it's in the middle of the series. This book, part of why it's so fun is that Lewis goes back in time and shows you what things were like during the reign of the 4 children from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And they kind of have a little cameo moment, and you know, at this point in the series, if you're reading it in published order, you think that we're done with those characters and they pop back up again and you're like, oh, it's so exciting. And so it's a lot more fun when it comes later in the series. All right, so let's talk about something else. A lot of people think that writers like J.R.R. Tolkien spent years and years developing these worlds, and then C.S. Lewis just like threw some darts and came up with some plot points and wrote this story. All right, this is not true. So C.S. Lewis actually put a lot of thought into the Chronicles. And if none of you have read Planet Narnia, it is amazing. I highly recommend it. So this book actually dispels that myth. And again, have a quote from him. Oh yeah. So the author says, you know, how is it that if these stories were really so thrown together, why has it become one of the best-selling and most influential children's stories in the world? Good question. So the C.S. Lewis had this idea that he took from medieval like astrology of all the planets in like 7 concentric circles. This idea of like the great celestial dance. And he just loved this idea and thought it was awesome. And he actually wrote a whole book about it. And so he loved this idea, which was kind of pagan, but he wanted to kind of infuse a Christian idea into it. And so Michael Ward, the author of Planet Narnia, argues that each of the Narnia books actually corresponds to one of these planets. And that Lewis kind of infused the character of that planet into the story. So, for example, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is Jupiter, which is all about like joy, mirth. It talks about like lions and kings. Wrath ended. So Lewis wrote a poem about the planets. And when he's describing Jupiter, he says, wrath ended and woes mended, winter passed and guilt forgiven. Which if you've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, really makes you think of that. And so the author just goes through and gives a lot of very compelling evidence for this theory. And so this is just another reason, in my opinion, to read the Chronicles in order, because Lewis put so much thought into them and into this like cycle of the planets. And one example is he bookends the series with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Last Battle. So if we believe Michael Ward, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is Jupiter, and the qualities of Jupiter are kingliness, joy, tragic splendor, summertime, which are all kind of themed in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so it's a very joyful book. There's sadness, but it begins and ends with joy. And then The Last Battle is Saturn, which is all about pestilence, treachery, disaster, death, sorrow, but also kind of wisdom and contemplation. So we get this like beginning of the series in joy, and then ending with sorrow, but moving through sorrow back into joy, because the end of The Last Battle is very joyful. And so it's kind of these two bookends. Okay, but Erin, C.S. Lewis said that the Chronicles should be read in chronological order. All right, let's see what he actually said. This is an argument that people make. So a little boy wrote to him and said he'd already read the series once. He wanted to read it again, and he wondered what order he should read them in. He thought he should read them in chronological order, but his mom said he should read them in published order. So he wrote to C.S. Lewis. And Lewis said, I think I agree with your order for reading the books more than with your mother's. The series was not planned beforehand as she thinks. When I wrote The Lion, I did not know I was going to write any more. Then I wrote Prince Caspian as a sequel, and still didn't think there would be any more. And when I had done the voyage, I felt quite sure it would be the last. But I found as I was wrong. So perhaps it does not matter very much in which order anyone read them. Correct, so it seems like Lewis doesn't care. So I guess we should read them in chronological order. But guess what C.S. Lewis also said? You must not believe all that authors tell you about how they wrote their own books. So frankly, I don't care if C.S. Lewis said that. He was wrong. And he also didn't say, like, I want them read chronologically. He told this little child who gave this idea that the child's idea was right. And he was always very kind to children and wanted them to feel like, you know, they were right, and he encouraged them to make their own stories and like write fan fiction about Narnia. He was pretty much on board with whatever kids wanted to do, as long as they felt good about themselves. So I don't really think we should pay attention to this. All right, now you know what order to read the Chronicles of Narnia in. And yeah, so don't read them in chronological order because it's wrong. And that is the end. All right, any questions?
Do you know when they were first packaged all together in the chronological order?
I don't, it's a good question. I think it would have been after his death,
Gotcha.
because they asked his
estate.
his like stepson what order to put them in, and he's like, well, I think he wanted them read in this order, so let's do that.
I work for HarperCollins.
Oh.
So I'm like, oh no, you must. I don't touch the Narnia books at
Yeah,
all,
right.
but I was just wondering.
I'm
how
sure
it
you're
happened.
making decisions about what order to kind of.
Yes,
put them
I'm
in.
really
Yeah.
up there on the ladder. But yeah, just wondering when it happened.
Question.
Yeah.
And the illustrations that you had pictures of when you're going through the first couple books, those are the ones that were in the editions that I read when I was a kid. Are those from the original
Yeah,
publication of the book? Okay.
yeah, those are by Pauline Baines, who was the original illustrator. And Lewis loved her work, but he didn't think she could draw lions. I think she can, I think they're great.
You can still buy those today.
No, I think that's the one that I think my grandpa gave it to us or something like that.
Most of the books today have those illustrations in them.
What did you think of the movie?
Which movie?
Let's.
Oh, this one?
Let's go with this one.
I love The Lion, Monster, and Wardrobe. I love Prince Caspian. Voyage of the Dawn Treader was a mess.
Is that the old one with like the puppet animals? Like the
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the new ones. There have been old ones.
I didn't realize they made a new one of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay, never mind.
So Disney made the first two movies
the
and then
indie
they dropped it,
release.
and another company picked it up with a different director,
Okay.
and so they, yeah. It's not good.
What you're saying is it got Star Wars.
But Greta Gerwig is making a new one.
Oh, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader?
No,
Well, I know which one.
we don't know yet.
Ah,
I think it's gonna be Magician's Nephew.
I think it's gonna be Horse in this boy.
Oh.
I would be really interested to see
That's
the
just asking for
adaptation of
trouble.
the Magician's Nephew. Yeah.
So has C.S. Lewis talked at all about all the Christian imagery in his books? I feel like I've heard a lot about
Yes.
that, and like obviously Aslan dying for the sins of the world is very Christ-like, but I feel like all of that went over my head when I was a kid. I was just like, oh, this is cool. There's dragons and unicorns
Right.
and talking
Yeah.
lions.
So he didn't wanna like spell it out too much, but I mean, obviously it is about Christ. And children would write to him asking, like, what's the meaning of this series? And he would write like, have you noticed that Aslan seems to be in all the books, like kind of leading them that way, but not actually spelling it out for them. So I don't think he ever went through and was like, here's what I meant in this and this and this book. He did write a letter to somebody where he like gives a 1-sentence summary of like the spiritual theme of each book. But I think that was his in detail as he went.
I mean, he's pretty explicit about who Aslan is in the last battle at the end.
Yeah.